Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's January 11th of 2022. We welcome back for the second consecutive year Alec Lewis, who covers the Royals for The Athletic. A lot of people work hard to put these Zoom calls together, and I want to give a shout out to Darren White, of course, who does all the engineering, and the crew of Paul Blackman, Barry Cantor, and Dave Tyson working each week to line up our speakers. We've got some great ones coming up, including Alec today. I'm just the eye candy, but I have a lot of fun doing it. Make sure you go to our website at kctigerclub.com for updates on meetings and events, as hopefully soon we'll be able to meet again, but for the foreseeable future, we will be on Zoom. If you're not a member of the club, we encourage you to join. If you're watching on YouTube, please like our videos and feel free to share a comment. We'd love your feedback. Hey, what a great weekend for Mizzou. The basketball team pulls an upset over number 15 Alabama behind Kobe Brown, and I believe he was named the SEC Player of the Week. In addition, in Kansas City, we got to cheer on Nick Bolton as he ran 86 yards to turn around that game against the Broncos on Saturday. And finally, head coach Gary Pinkel named to the College Football Hall of Fame. Very excited for him. Our guest, Alec Lewis, covers the Royals for The Athletic. His Twitter handle is @Alec_Lewis. Alec's an Alabama native, but he got his journalism degree from the University of Missouri. Alec, welcome. I see The Athletic sold to the New York Times for $550 million. What's your share of that?
Yeah, it's we still don't really know, but I'm hoping there's a nice gift in my mailbox here in Kansas City. So no, it was an interesting kind of bit of news last week. I still kind of getting informed on everything, but I think I'm optimistic. I think I was having a conversation with the Royals executive actually the day that it happened. He asked me, and I just told him what I tell really everybody. It's like I got into this going to Mizzou, really motivated to do this job and get to do the work and be around athletes and players. And the thing that my dad and I always say is like, there are a lot of things that are out of your control, and you just kind of do the job as best you can and try to enjoy it as much as you can while doing it. So that will continue to be my perspective. But no, it's interesting. I mean, I've read the New York Times. I remember sitting as like a seventh grader reading Howard Beck, and he covered the Knicks at the time. And I'll never forget like sitting at the kitchen table before I went to middle school and high school reading the Times. So kind of a crazy whirlwind type thing, but no, I'm happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Always great to have you. One other question I want to ask you before we get into baseball. You covered Mizzou football when you were an undergrad. What were your thoughts about Gary Pinkel getting elected to the Hall of Fame?
So awesome. I covered his last season in 2015, which was obviously a wild year as a freshman in college to cover that. I remember I was like a features writer for the Maneater student newspaper. And I remember they gave me the opportunity to do some football stuff. The first camp I covered, I think it was like a scrimmage on a Saturday, and Drew Lock kind of had this unbelievable scrimmage performance, and Matty Mock was still the quarterback. So that was my first introduction. But Gary was great. I mean, he was I remember in the press conferences, like very monotone. You couldn't get him to say anything. That was just kind of his MO, but you could tell how much respect he had from the players and the other media members that I obviously looked up to when I was a young person who knew nothing, who still knows nothing. But it was very cool. I'll never forget. And I tweeted this, sitting in the bowels of Arrowhead Stadium after they beat BYU after such a wild week, and just the emotion that he had and kind of the inspirational message that he gave after the game will always stick with me for some reason. I think just because of how profound it was. And so to see that honor for him, I know how many people believe that that's well-deserved, people who know him much better than I do. So it was very, very cool.
We're all very excited for him and proud of him. Let's turn to baseball. Usually the hot stove league is our topic, but with the lockout, that's kind of put everything on hold. I saw today you retweeted something about Jeff Passan reporting that I guess MLB is finally making a counter proposal to the players.
Yeah, that's what it sounds as if. It sounds as if that is the plan. I think the lockout began in obviously early December. The owners locked out the players, and since then, from all conversations and all reports, the two sides have not met. So it's an interesting thing. You have this lockout, and the two sides aren't getting together to push it forward. You have a lot of questions on why that is, and I've talked to a lot of people about it. And I think in many circumstances, specifically these types of labor situations, until there's a real deadline or moment at which it pushes things along, it can go pretty stagnant. And these two sides have obviously been negotiating and organizing and thinking about ways in which to approach these negotiations for a long time now, and it goes back far beyond the 2020 year, which was a tumultuous time period for the two sides in itself. And so I think to see that these two sides are meeting, I can't help but think it's not an optimistic thing. I can't help but think optimistically about it, because I think I don't know, to be able to get baseball back, these two sides have to be at the table and speaking about the certain economic elements that have them so far apart.
I know we could talk about this topic for a while and go through all the details, and I want to get to more on-field stuff, but I was listening to 610 Sports last week, and Whit Merrifield was a guest, and I'm sure you've heard his comments. The one that stood out to me, and I have a lot of respect for Whit, and he's a great player, he had a great career, and he's the Royals player rep. He made a comment basically, well, we have too many business people and not enough baseball people running the game. Well, if you didn't have the business people, you wouldn't have those billions of dollars that guys are making, or the millions getting paid. I just thought that was kind of a naive comment, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I always, when comments like that are made, I'm trying to put myself in these guys' shoes and how they view it. And I think I don't know. I think there is this big macro perspective that the people in charge are they don't like baseball, and so sometimes you see that through the comments. But I think it's hard for me not to think about that and think about John Sherman and how he is and how he's proven and publicly said. I mean, this guy really cares about baseball. And he cares about baseball in Kansas City. And obviously he's a businessman and entrepreneur. That's how he made the money to be able to spearhead the group to buy the team. But he really cares about baseball. I remember having a conversation with him around the All-Star break. I think it was during the All-Star break. And he talked about some of the struggles early in the season. How he would have to like go on a walk around the neighborhood. He was so frustrated watching some of their performance. And so I think to think that none of these guys care about baseball at all, I think that's a little out of place. But in the end, they are business. They get to they get to the level at which they can purchase teams because they have the business mindset in many cases. And so it is what it is. I think the players obviously right now are thinking very business-like as well. They're millionaires who would like to have more money, and I think some of the collective bargaining agreements over the years have led to them acting like this. And obviously it's a contentious period. It's two sides, any negotiation, two sides want to do the best thing for the future of their business. So yeah, it's tough. I think there's a lot of like those comments. It's hard for me not to think about it in the context of like, here's Whit, a guy who wants to play. He wants the best for the player's side. So he's out on the radio talking, and stuff happens when you are publicly talking and you mention certain things. It's easy to nitpick, I think, at times when there's so much contention with these negotiations.
And I'm not taking sides either way. I know both sides have a point. The thing that sticks with me is baseball is not as popular as the NFL. The TV ratings are down. There's millions and billions at risk on both sides. Why are we at this point?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I think NBA Players Association director Michelle Roberts made this kind of point. She, in a story with The Athletic, she said, like, I don't even understand what baseball is doing. They're in a lockout without any season underway. It didn't make any sense. And I think, Mark, like to your point, I'm a young person who, truth be told, like I was not a baseball avid fan beyond the playing that I did as a youth. Like I played as a kid, and it was like my greatest sports memories playing were through baseball. But as I got older, I didn't watch a ton of baseball. I didn't follow it a ton. And then this job came about, and it's actually kind of re-energized my love for it because I'm around it every day. But I think a lot about, like, a lot of my friends, people that went to Mizzou, people that didn't go to Mizzou, people of all different types of backgrounds who are around my age, baseball is not their love right now. And I think just me, because I'm in it and I see the beauty of a lot of the game and the players and the stories, et cetera. I wish baseball thought more about how they could garner more, I think, attention and engagement with people my age for the future of the sport. I think so often these two sides think so present, and it's understandable. I know they all have interest for the now, but I think for the sport, and I think you would have a lot of Royals executives, namely Dayton Moore, who would agree. It just, for the betterment of the sport long term, I wish the two sides thought more about what they could do now for that. I think it's important. I think the game is unbelievable. I think it's why it's been as popular as it has been for more than 100 years now. But I think for it to continue to be present in the minds of people in this country, there has to be a lot of thought moving forward on how to maintain and attract a younger audience. And I just don't know if there is enough thought about put into that these days. I don't know.
Now, I'm a passionate baseball fan, but I'm an old guy. And I watch every Royals game. I watch postseason. The game that sticks out to me from the last year was the wild card game between the Cardinals and the Dodgers. And it was 2-1, a 9-inning game, and it took 4 hours.
Yeah.
What do we got to do to speed it up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there have been a lot of suggestions on this subject. And the problem is the lockout contention over economics is kind of, it puts some of the things that I think would be better for the game to the side. I mean, these types of questions about what can speed up the game and improve the game are afterthoughts because of the role that economics is playing in these discussions. What can be done? I think a lot of people talk about a pitch clock. Pitcher, you'll see a Royals pitcher throw a pitch, walk around the mound, breathe, step off, touch their hat for some reason every single pitch. I don't understand why, and then finally pitch it. And then you'll see, I think the thing a lot of people talk about in this era of baseball is the 3 true outcomes: walks, strikeouts, home runs. There's not enough action on a pitch by pitch basis. And I think some people have suggestions about the shift, about certain elements. For me, I sit up, like you said, Mark, like it's my job, obviously, to be at every game, to watch every game. And I don't have to write about every game. So I'm not always laser focused on in the 6th inning when it's a 5-1 game. And I've had a hard time through some of these games, game 70 of the season, game 130, I have a hard time staying locked in, staying energized. And I'm with you 100% that when I watch a game and it takes 4 hours after watching the night before and it took 3 hours and 55 minutes, it something has to be done. And there are obviously smarter minds than I, hopefully, at work on this, but I really think they have to be for baseball to maintain, like I said, the popularity that it has had for a long, long time. I don't know. I think that they're really, there has to be a lot done. And there have been people like Theo Epstein who's working in the commissioner's office trying to think about ways to improve it. But the more action, for me, the better. And I know the interesting thing is, like, the Royals strongly believe this. I think it benefits them because of the park they play in. But you hear Mike Matheny talk, it had to have been at least 20 times, 30 times this season about how much he wanted action, wanted to see more action. So what they do to change it, hopefully they do something. What they do will be very interesting, but I think it's paramount.
Talking to Alec Lewis from The Athletic. He covers the Royals. If you'd like to ask him a question at the end of our discussion, please use the chat feature at the bottom. Excuse me. Alec, let's talk about on-the-field stuff. About middle of last season, I was pulling my hair out watching the Royals. They had a horrible stretch of about 40 games, if I remember. But, then at the end of the season, there was a lot to be optimistic about. So what do we look forward to this season?
Bobby Witt Jr. No, I think it's an interesting time. I was talking with a coach who doesn't coach for the Royals. It coaches in the division yesterday, and he was saying, like, if things click for this team, they will be very dangerous, and we will not want to play them. And I think a lot of that has to do with the young pitching. I think most of it has to do with the young pitching. Can guys like Brady Singer, Jackson Kowar, Carlos Hernandez, Daniel Lynch, Chris Bubich, can they continue to progress and take steps forward? And I think that raises questions about staff, about development. And I was having a conversation with a Royals executive talking about their pitching development processes and how improved they are from years past. And if that's the case, I think the results should show in a year like this upcoming season. If that can happen, I think the Royals will be fun to watch on a daily basis, because when you show up to the park, or when you turn on the TV or your stream or what have you to watch these games, you know that you have a chance to win. Beyond that, I joked about Bobby Witt Jr., but prospects like he and MJ Melendez and Nick Prado, I think these guys will be very fun to watch. They'll probably take their lumps early in their debuts, but I think they all should debut this upcoming season, and they should inject some life. And then, I mean, you get to watch Salvador Perez on a daily basis. How could you not be excited about that? But I think there's a lot of intrigue. I think this is a year where they're going to say, as they always have in these last few years they had, that they want to compete, they want to push for a playoff spot. But I think if you're looking at this realistically, this is a year where they start to see what they really have with this young pitching and what they have with some of these young hitting prospects, and see what they can kind of, I think, evaluate what they have moving into 2023, which I think will be a year that playoff expectations should probably exist.
Melendez and Prado, correct me if I'm wrong, are currently on the 25-man roster. Witt is not, but that's so they wouldn't be exposed to Rule 5 because of service time. Is that correct?
Yeah, the 40-man roster, it's very – it's funny because there are some Royals executives who think about this stuff all day long, who's on the 40-man to protect them. But, yeah, MJ Melendez and Nick Prado, if they hadn't been added to the 40-man, they would have been exposed to the Rule 5, as you said, Mark, and that means another team could have snagged them. And those two guys are too good for that to happen. But Bobby Witt Jr., yeah, they're preparing to have a spot for him. It's kind of he's proven everything he could prove at this point.
I hate to sound like I'm dogging on this guy I'm going to ask you about, but why is Ryan O'Hearn on the roster? And I he's had some moments, but it seems like he's had 4 or 5 chances, and it's time to move on.
No doubt he's had a lot of chances. There is no question about it. It's interesting because I think in 2018, which might have been his first taste, I think he came up and had posted like an 800 OPS, and there was some signs. So then they give him the opportunity in 2019, doesn't do much with it. 2020 he plays a little bit, doesn't do much with it. So then they signed Carlos Santana, who obviously struggled throughout the second half of the season. And so to your question, why is Ryan O'Hearn still on the roster? Well, the truth of the matter is they tendered him a contract, which is kind of just a procedural thing to ensure that if they absolutely need him as depth, that they will have him. Some might ask, well, couldn't they find a first baseman good enough elsewhere for depth? Maybe, but you know what you have in Ryan O'Hearn. You know what you have with him in the clubhouse. You know he's close to some of the other guys. He's not going to be a guy who other guys in the clubhouse kind of push to the side. And I think for the Royals, they have a situation with Carlos Santana where he's owed, I believe, $10.5 million this upcoming season. I think with the prospects they have, like Nick Prado, they might want to move a guy like Carlos Santana to open up some money for some relief help. And in that case, you lose a veteran first baseman. You might need some sort of depth, and that's where Ryan O'Hearn could fill in. But the reality is, because they tendered him a contract, does not mean he'll be in spring training with the Royals. Doesn't mean he'll be on the roster with the Royals. It's just kind of a procedural move at the time to ensure that if absolutely necessary, if they need him, if the necessity exists, then they'll have them.
If and when the lockout ends, do you see the Royals being active at all in the free agent market?
Not a ton. I know that's not the answer that anybody wants to hear. I would enjoy fireworks, but no, I don't think a ton just because of the situation they're in. I think I wrote a column. I can't remember when it was, maybe early December or November, and it was funny some of the reaction to it. And I think it was because I did a bad job of trying to explain what I was trying to explain. But I think the purpose of the column was like it's probably pretty quiet now, and it will probably be quiet throughout this offseason. But if the Royals do what they said they know they need to do, and that's be more transactional in the future, then it should get more active moving forward. I think the reality is a lot of these young pitchers are going to be entering arbitration at the same time. And usually that's the point at which teams part with these guys and multiply in trades in a way that like Tampa Bay has done in recent years. Cleveland's done it. And I think the Royals will probably operate. They've talked about wanting to operate more like that. And if that's the case, it should be pretty active. There should be trades pretty often. There should be the movement pretty often. And so while I think it's going to be pretty quiet when if the lockout ends, right, I think it'll be quiet after that. I think as the years move forward and think about like next offseason, I think it could get pretty interesting from an activity standpoint if the Royals evolve the way they've kind of talked about evolving.
If the season were to start tomorrow, what is your Royals lineup? And I don't need batting order, just go around the diamond.
Yeah, I think Salvador Perez would be your catcher. Carlos Santana's still on the team, so I'd say he is probably at first base, but I think I'll do it how I think Salvador Perez at catcher, Hunter Dozier at first base, Nicky Lopez at second base, Adalberto Mondesi at shortstop. Sorry. Bobby Witt Jr. at third base, Andrew Benintendi in left field, Michael A. Taylor in center field, and Whit Merrifield in right field. And then I think as the DH, maybe a guy like MJ Melendez. I don't know if the bat's ready, but the shortstop, third base, second base situation will be a talking point whenever this lockout ends, because the Mondesi, Bobby Witt Jr. positional thing is a thing that I'm sure you might have a follow-up about.
Well, do you see the Royals taking a look at Mondesi in the outfield?
I think it's possible, and I don't think they would rule it out. And I think they probably have a lot of people in their front office that might think it's the smart move, or they think it's a possible move. But the reality is, outfielders are running probably. They gave us a number for that. I asked one time about how much more the body's exerting in the outfield, and it's a lot more. And so I think with a guy like Mondesi, whose body is broken down in all different places, I just don't see how that's the optimal situation to keep him healthy. Obviously with Mondesi, there are just so many questions, and he's played only 100 games once in his big league career. So the questions are totally understandable. The organization has stuck by him all this time. And I think it's to the point where this offseason for him and making sure his body allows him to stay on the field is going to be pivotal for his career. It's for the Royals, obviously going to be important, but for him to have any to garner any trust that he can be a piece, he's got to prove it. And I think he knows that.
All right, let's go to starting rotation. Brad Keller was our opening day starter last year, and boy, did he struggle throughout the season. Who's your opening day starter, and what about the rest of the rotation?
It's a great question. I think potentially I kind of want to say Brady Singer. A lot of people are going to balk at that with his third pitch, the changeup, which is a focal point this offseason. But I think Brady, just with his competitiveness and experience, being one of those young guys, setting the tone would be kind of fun. I would totally understand the argument for a guy like Carlos Hernandez, who was exceptional at the end of last season. I think he'll be in the rotation. Daniel Lynch, I think, obviously had a rough go his first time around, but I think flashed why he was the prospect and ranked the prospect he was. So I'll say Daniel Lynch, and I think Brad Keller, and I'd still think at least early on.
You locked up just a second there after Brad Keller. Who'd you say?
Mike Minor, I think it remains, and I think the innings he's built up. I just think that there's some kind of value in that, at least at the beginning of this season, while these young guys are still kind of getting acclimated to the big league season. I know there's no Chris Bubich in there, and he looked really good at the end of last season. So I could definitely see him being in the rotation. But I think those 6 guys, health is always a thing with pitching. I think those 6 guys are probably the front runners to be in the rotation. But I'll say Brady Singer for opening day starter, because I think he's going to want to prove a lot and probably show up to spring training showing that.
Scott Barlow, your closer?
Yeah, I still think Mike Matheny will operate the bullpen like he has in these last 2 years, at least early on, where he's kind of mixing and matching the way that Tampa has done it over the years. But I think Scott, I think it's hard because he's a reliever, but I don't even think last season we talked enough about how good he was, how consistent he was. I mean, we would joke in the press box, like, I mean, it's the 8th inning. They need a guy. We would joke, like, it's got to be Barlow, right? And he's trotting in every single time, and his arm's fine. He's throwing curves, sliders, bouncing it with 95 miles an hour. It's impressive. I think Josh Staumont will have kind of a bounce back year, even though his numbers were fine last year. But I think they're focused on, the Royals are focused on kind of beefing up that bullpen to help these young guys in the rotation. But Barlow is the most trustworthy guy without question.
Comparing the coming season to 2021, where do the Royals most need an upgrade or improvement? What position?
I think starting pitching. I just think if it can be better on a more consistent basis, I think that is it. If you're talking about in the field, I don't know, first base is without, I mean, the first base production, I wrote about this, but I think over the since Eric Hosmer left, the Royals are last in first base production in almost every category. They've obviously had Rhino Hearn there, some Ryan McBroom, Lucas Duda at times, Carlos Santana this past year. If they could be better at first base, it would be hard not to be better at first base, really, with how bad they've been. So I think that's the spot. I think it would be on guys like Hunter Dozier to bounce back and produce at that position, or it will be a responsibility of a prospect like Nick Prado to come up and succeed, which I think he's definitely capable of.
There was an interesting story in your publication, I think it was last week, about players most likely to be traded. You have Ryan O'Hearn, but the one that caught my eye were the Padres. The 2 names they mentioned were Eric Hosmer and Will Myers. Any chance Eric could come back to the Royals?
It would be awesome. I mean, I think people joke, obviously, about Dayton Moore's love of bringing back former guys. We saw that with Wade Davis and Greg Holland. And so I think it would be very cool. I don't know if the contract makes that feasible at all. I'm sure San Diego would have to attach some kind of prospect, and the Royals would have to be okay with that. I think if the Royals were really close to contending, I think it might be even more possible because of what he would do to influence the clubhouse. But I think with where they're at, I'm not sure it makes the most sense. I said Ryan O'Hearn. It was kind of an interesting thing. I mostly took it as like, what's the player who's on the roster who will most likely not be on the roster once the season begins. That's why I had Ryan O'Hearn. But the Haas thing would be cool. It just from what he's meant to this place and what he could mean to the clubhouse. I think it's probably a little far-fetched at this point.
You had a survey recently, a fan survey. One of the topics was downtown stadium. Personally, I would love it. I've been to most of the ballparks, and I definitely favor downtown. It wasn't adamant. It was kind of a mixed result on that.
It really was. I was fascinated in it, and I've been very fascinated in this subject the last 2 months. It's led me down a rabbit hole that occupies most of my days, which is a kind of sneak peek to maybe some stuff to come. But it was interesting to see that response. I was really looking forward to seeing it. I think there's just a lot of skepticism. It seems like the one contention point, the most common one, is is just parking. It seems like that is, and I was speaking with an architect, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, and we laughed about it because like this is all he said. He's like, this is always the biggest contention point with something like with a project like this, but there's ways to kind of ways around it, et cetera. I think the public comments from John Sherman should probably clue you in pretty good to what his hope would be if this idea became a official idea, official project. I think he really wants to do something that can impact the city and underrepresented parts of the city, which is someone who knows him very well said recently to me in regards to this conversation, said like, if you know John Sherman, you know he's been doing this type of thing for a long time, and this would just be another step to doing that. And then obviously there's skepticism. I've spoken to professors who will say, how much impact can this really have on a city, on the urban environment? For me, it's just been fascinating to hear all different perspectives on it, because I think it's something that if you go back in history in Kansas City and elsewhere, it's a conversation point that exists so often. And it speaks to what a city wants to be, how a city thinks it can evolve, why a city might be resistant to change. I think the ballpark conversation ties with the city in a way that very few other projects do. So it's fascinated me on a lot of levels.
Well, I think it's going to happen. And I think on the parking, we're going to have improved public transportation that you won't need to park at the stadium anymore. And there'll be a lot more to do around the stadium. I love the K, but there's nothing around it.
The other thing too, and I because a lot of my friends are people around my age, they talk a lot like, man, I would go downtown. We could go spend time before, we could go to the game for a bunch of innings, enjoy baseball, then go out after. And I think the Royals with this project, and some people I've talked to have said this, like, have to think about where baseball is headed and the market and the I don't know, the environment in which baseball is attracting certain people. In the 1970s, when they moved to Kauffman Stadium, suburbanization in America was I mean, it was the biggest idea. It was the most popular thing. Families moved to the suburbs, and baseball was a family sport. I think as baseball looks forward and thinks about the market it can attract, I think it has to look at where it can be located to hit that market best. And I'm sure this is 101 for the Royals which are studying this and thinking about it.
Well, I'm going to insert an editorial comment here. If you don't like downtown baseball, I don't think it'll work. Go to a game in San Diego or Pittsburgh or St. Louis. I think it might change your mind, because I've been to all of them and it's just great. Or Wrigley Field even. So that's not really downtown, but there's a lot going on. Okay, enough of that. One thing I want to ask you before we get to questions from our viewers: the Royals made an administrative change last year, elevating Dayton Moore, making J.J. Piccolo the general manager. Have you noticed any changes? Do you anticipate much of a change?
I don't think I've noticed a ton of changes. I think how JJ and Dayton described what these changes would mean is really what I've seen thus far. I think Dayton, the first thing to understand is baseball over the past few years and maybe half decade has grown very title specific. If you go down some of these organizations, websites, front office pages, you'll see so many different titles: president, general manager, senior director, vice president. And these titles are both kind of just titles, but they're also important in the sense that if other organizations want to interview X candidate for a certain job, it's easier to decline that interview if they have a title that goes beyond the title that they currently have, if that makes sense. And so I think there was some element of that with these changes, but also I think Dayton really, he wanted to kind of transition more to I think what he loves and probably what he's best at, and that's culture, people, scouting, the international market. And I think when you're dealing with the day-to-day minutia of the general manager's job, which is who's coming up here? If this happens, if this player gets COVID, who fills in? What are we doing with this roster situation? If this player gets hurt, I think that it just bogged Dayton down from doing the things that I think he is best at. And I think JJ, obviously, with what he's done and how long he's been here, specifically what he's done with kind of helping the player development process of the Royals evolve since 2019. I think it just fit perfectly for him to slide into this role, to work with the coaching staff that's using so much data these days and has to filter through so much. I just think it was a transition. But I mean, the role shift and how I've seen it evolve, I think both these guys could talk about the team. Both of them could talk about the future, player development, scouting, et cetera. There's so much synergy between these two because they've been together for decades and decades that I just think I can't foresee some drastic shift beyond just roles and certain elements that are probably strategically fit for each individual in the new role.
All right, you ready for some questions from our viewers?
Let's do it.
What can you tell us about the changes in teaching at the minor league level in both hitting and pitching for the Royals? Any specifics?
Yeah, without question. I've dug in a lot on this, and I think I wrote a story. I can't remember which month. It all blends together at this point on the revamped hitting development department, and really that related to the pitching side too. It just was so evident with hitting. But essentially, I'll walk you through it. In 2019, after 2019, which was a brutal year for the Royals from a minor league statistical standpoint, they came together and they're like, well, we've got to evolve, we've got to adapt, we've got to become kind of the front line of what's happening in player development. So what did they do? They shifted a guy named Alec Zumwalt, who has been with the organization for some time, was a key advanced scout in the World Series run. They shifted him to the director of hitting, and they hired a couple people from the outside. They hired a guy named Drew Saylor, who had been with the Dodgers. In the Pirates, they hired Keone Duren, a guy who had been with the Chicago Cubs. They hired a guy, Mike Tozar, who had worked with Jorge Soler and has worked with Salvador Perez and a bunch of really famous hitters over the years. And these guys kind of came together with the other departments, research and development, behavioral science, nutrition, to kind of rethink how the Royals were developing hitters on an individual basis. There's no specific platform that every hitter has to do this, because every hitter's body's different. They all have different routines. They all need different things. They're all going through different things. And so the Royals have tailored their development process to each individual, with all of these departments kind of pouring in for each specific player, if that makes sense. The pitching side is the same way. They put Paul Gibson in charge. They're utilizing the technologies that everybody is in the field, Edgertronic, Rapsodo, some of these buzzwords and pitch tracking technologies and cameras. And then they hired some pitching coaches from the outside, a guy named Derek Lewis, a guy named Jason Simon-Tachi, who was with the Cardinals. And similarly, the pitching side is working with research and development, the data people within the Royals organization, the behavioral science staff, for the betterment of each individual player. And I think those changes that began in the fall of 2019 started to show itself this past season for the first time, when these minor leagues were back in play and the Royals players succeeded the way they did. Obviously, when pitchers like Daniel Lynch or Jackson Kowar come up and struggle, there's skepticism of the process. And I think the Royals would understand these guys and admit that these guys were really thrust into it. There were probably some oversights in certain ways, but I think for them, they view it as certain things that happen within the player development structure. The new player development structure will kind of help refine the structure for years to come. But those are the changes, and those were really spearheaded by Dayton Moore and JJ Piccolo and the staffs beneath them that I mentioned, Alex Zumwalt and Paul Gibson and their staffs. And it's been fascinating to cover. I remember I was out in Surprise, Arizona in October 2019 when they held the first new hitting camp, and you could just see the enthusiasm from some of the players. And I think that enthusiasm has helped what has been done in these last couple of years.
All right, next question. Like Kobe Brown, you're from Alabama. Talk about your perception of Mizzou as you were considering your college choice, and what is the perception your peers in the business have now that you are a member of the Mizzou journalism mafia?
Wow. Great, unbelievably fun question. I growing up, I didn't really like Mizzou was present in mind. I had a neighbor who was like a big Mizzou fan. His family was from kind of I think the St. Louis area, and their neighbor's dad had gone to Mizzou. So I remember him talking about Jeremy Macklin. They had certain Mizzou for like Memorial Stadium pictures on their walls, but I was like a young kid. I didn't really think anything of it. Didn't think very much of Mizzou. It just didn't resonate that much with me. And then in high school, I mean, Mizzou continued to win SEC East championships and prove and recruit guys like Dorial Green Beckham, who was the number one player in the country. So it was more front of mind. And then obviously, as I became interested in journalism, I remember having a conversation with a guy, Lars Anderson, who's an author of many books and a professor in Alabama. And I asked him about what schools do you think? He's like, you got to go to Mizzou if you want to do journalism. It is the thing. So I visited in October of 2014, the Georgia game. They lost, I believe, 34-0 maybe. And Matty Mock, I think, threw 4 interceptions, and it was cold and windy. I remember it well. And it wasn't funny because it was unfortunate because Mizzou was really hopeful, and it was a time that I think they had proven a lot. But for me, it was kind of silly. It's like, this is the first introduction, but I pushed through, and I thought the journalism program, thought very highly of it after conversations I had with people. And I mean, the experience is unlike anything I could have ever dreamed of. Really. There were guys older than me, Aaron Reese, Alex Schiffer, guys who are now write for The Athletic, Colton Pouncey, and then obviously the Wright Thompson, Seth Wickershams of the world, and even guys like Dave and Gabe, you just had unbelievable respect for, that made it so fun. And I think the second question was mostly about I don't know, kind of how do I come across other writers and such. And yeah, I mean, one of our Royals beat writers, Andy Rogers, who I'm sure will join you guys at some point. I hope so, because she's really great. I mean, we have somewhat different jobs, and she's just the minutia of every single day. And it's amazing to watch, like, how driven and competitive and I don't know, just on top of things she is. And that's just the nature of seemingly every writer that I went to Mizzou with, or who was older than me or younger than me. I mean, just so much drive and willingness to kind of do what they can to improve. And that energy, I wouldn't be here covering this team if it weren't for that. I tell people that all the time. I was speaking with a prospective college journalism student about Mizzou when I was home for the break. And that's the energy and the enthusiasm and the passion and the drive of the people that go to Mizzou to do journalistic work, I think is probably unlike anywhere else. And I think it's what has brought so many of us to each point in our careers. And I will be forever grateful for that.
Wow. Thank you for saying that. I'm a Mizzou J grad, and I get to do free Zoom calls. So
yeah, I mean, but I one of my professors, Ron Stoggill, even from a professor standpoint, like he would skip a week of teaching us, and we would have subs, or he would cancel class, and it was like, all right. And he would come back and he's like, yeah, I just spent a week with Serena Williams for this profile in the Wall Street Journal magazine. Like, that was the professor that I had. And as you want to do this work and tell stories about people and what they overcome, to have people like that in your sphere every day, just special. I don't know. It means a lot to me still. I was having a conversation with a graduate who's in this business yesterday about what he wants to do, where he wants to go, and how it's just like people help me, and Mizzou people help me, and I'll never be more thankful for that. The mentors that have been present. So it'll matter to me to give back as much as possible forever. That's how it is.
You mentioned that Georgia game. The one thing I remember about that, going in the game, Todd Gurley had gotten hurt.
No doubt.
and they said, "Oh well, we might have a chance because they're going to have to pay this freshman that nobody's ever heard of, named Nick Chubb."
And I think he ran for like 200 yards or something. Yeah.
Okay, question about Royals TV, and this is a good one. In March, I will lose cable TV via Google Fiber. I'll probably go with YouTube TV. Will I be able to get the Royals and sporting games from Valley or Sinclair? You have an answer on that?
I think the answer would be right now, I don't believe so. We were talking about this before I came on, and I said this, and I said knowing this, and I have like, if I showed you around, I have like notepads of all these big stories I'm working on, and this television situation is one that I know by from now until when baseball starts, I have to have answers for people within it. So hopefully I can provide a longer, more in-depth, understandable story on this, or somebody at the Athletic can, because it's as we've kind of talked about. I mean, baseball needs to be visible to people for the game, for the betterment of the game. So the fact that you wouldn't be able to get it on one of the most popular streaming platforms is frankly absurd. So what needs to happen for people to be able to watch is important to me to have the answers for. I know I'm kind of skirting a real answer to your question, but it's important to me to do some reporting to really get to the bottom of this, because people care. I hear about it, understandably. It's unfortunate. How could Royals fans not be able to watch Royals games in the era of 2022? It's kind of mind blowing, but
it's a problem, and I'm sure the club wants to get it fixed. All right, you said baseball wasn't your favorite spectator sport growing up. What was your favorite? Did you choose to cover baseball, or did the opportunity just present itself? Do you have a favorite story of something you covered while a student reporter?
yeah. Basketball was, I think, my favorite because my high school basketball team when I was in high school became really good, and they won their first state championship, and I got to write about that, and that kind of spurred me into the dream that I've had of getting to do this at the level that I get to do it. And I played basketball, and I think it was probably my best playing sport, even though I was probably still terrible. And I think it always resonated with me in a way that some of these other sports probably haven't as much. But I mean, I say that I grew up with Alabama Auburn football every single day, every single week. So it's I know that on a level that's just kind of I don't know, second nature. As far as baseball and the opportunity, yeah, I mean, the story's wild. The fall of my senior year, I covered Mizzou for the Athletic on a temporary contracted basis. I don't know how much of this I should say or can say, but I don't really mind. And so I was doing a story a week on Mizzou for the Athletic. It was really challenging. I mean, how can you garner a big audience with one feature story a week when you have guys like Gabe Yarman, who will be on this next week and has all the answers and all the insights and all the relationships? It was kind of an impossible task. It was really challenging. My editor and I went back and forth. I always wanted to do more, even though I was trying to also enjoy my senior year at Harpo's sometimes. So it was kind of it was somewhat of a challenge. And then once the Mizzou football season ended, and after Kelly Bryant committed, and I wrote about that and some other elements of that year, I just stopped with the Athletic. It was kind of done. I was applying elsewhere, trying to figure things out. And then I believe it was like February of my senior year, I got a call from the same editor who I worked with. He was like, "What would be your interest in Royals baseball?" I admittedly read a lot of Rustin before I got this job, because Rustin's unbelievable. How could you not? If you want to do this type of job, you try. I think it's best to try to read the best and understand why they're doing what they're doing. And Rustin just had so much respect through the years that I read a lot of his work. So to think about what it would be like to follow him in that role when I hadn't done baseball was like, I don't know about this, but I kind of just I told the editor, like, I want to do stories about people. I feel like I can do that in any avenue. After a lot of interviews and kind of just trying to present it as a possibility that I could do this job well, I believe, at least it faked it. If I didn't believe, it happened where they hired me in March of my senior year, skipped a week of school, and went down to Surprise, Arizona. And I remember sitting in Dayton Moore's office, like him talking about extensions, and I had no idea what was going on. It was a whirlwind. I was still a senior. I flew back, and I think I went on a senior trip, and I was like working for the Athletic at that point. So it was a crazy, crazy time. And then as far as favorite stories of covering things at Mizzou, man, I mean, there are just so many. For me, one of the highlights, when Jeremiah Tillman was a freshman and his career was what it was, but after he committed, I mean, I was so fascinated by East St. Louis and where he was from and his family dynamic, and just East St. Louis in general, a place that people talk down about people. And so I remember I got in touch with his mom and dad, Jeremiah's, and told them, like, I want to come spend some time with you guys and hear about Jeremiah's upbringing, his story, East St. Louis. And I remember I road tripped with a photographer, Emil, who works in Dallas now, and we spent a day at East St. Louis. I spent a day with, I believe, Konzo's sister, who was the principal at the school. I drove around town with people. I was in Jeremiah's house with his grandparents and his siblings, and we got to do this big feature that I would not want to read now because I'm sure it's terrible, but it was just a highlight of it just felt like you were doing something about place, about people that was important. And I think that was a highlight. I mean, there are funny stories. I remember the night before the Iowa State basketball game, that was supposed to be the Porters introduction, where Michael didn't play very long. I remember before the game, I was outside. It was freezing, always freezing here, seemingly. And I remember Reed Nico, who I love just as a person to talk to. And it was great to see him kind of finish. He'd just been through so much in his life. But I remember before that game, I was out like on the phone, and he was like pacing back and forth in like a varsity jacket in the winter cold. And it was like the emotion of all of it. The anticipation of that was so cool. I mean, I was at so many practices and so many moments. The Jaden Cox national championships I covered, got to spend time with him and his family. It was like the most unbelievable thing. People say, like, man, I wish Missouri sports were better while you were there. And like, obviously, yeah, I mean, winning is fun to cover, but some of the opportunities and the anecdotes and the memories, it's endless, and it's fun to think about. And I'm sure the stories will come flooding to me more as time goes on. But it was so cool to be around for so much of it.
I want to ask you one final question. This is from me. Talk about the joy of covering Sal Perez.
It's amazing. Just the type of energy that guy has on a daily basis. I mean, there are two things that I don't think people realize enough about Salvi, and I say this often. But the one, I mean, you always see him smiling. They're middle of the games, he's signing bats for people because he wants the people who come to the games to enjoy their experience and enjoy baseball. And that's just, it's amazing. And you see the smiles, and he's the nicest, seems like the nicest guy. But what people don't usually see is, like, right now on January 11th, Salvador Perez is in the gym in Miami, squatting an absurd, ridiculous amount and gritting through his teeth on a level that the people who work around him and with him say it's like the craziest work ethic they've ever seen. And so, like, to know that this guy puts in the work and then gets to enjoy it and does enjoy it and is present like he is on a daily basis is fascinating. The other thing I think with Salvi that I've just seen as I'm like, I love this past year, I had the opportunity, we got to go back on the field. We weren't in the clubhouse, but you could go on the field. And there was kind of like rules at which you could go down at certain times. And I guess I kind of skirted the rules at some points, and I would just go sit in the dugout like hours before the game. And coaches would walk through, get to talk to them. Players would walk through, get to talk to them. And I would just kind of observe. I just loved being in that environment. And I would watch Salvi just interact with certain people and joke with certain people. I remember he had a conversation with Joel Goldberg where he was just giving Joel, he was just messing with Joel. But Salvi just understands people in a way that's hard to understand unless you are just around it and see the way he interacts. And so that makes it it just makes it such a joy to cover. Watching him do what he does on the field is a whole different thing. But there were just so many times in the press box where he did it again. And I like, you're supposed to be quiet in the press box and busy and on your computer. You just laughed about how much fun it was to see this guy do this superhuman type thing every day. Massive human being. The smile's better in person, and he jokes with us on Zoom. It's something I'll cherish forever, that I've gotten to be around it for as long as I have, and we'll get to continue to be, hopefully.
He is great to watch. Hey, Alec, I think I could talk baseball with you all day, but I know you got to go. Really appreciate your time. Just want to ask one more thing. In your home state, are they in serious mourning today?
I don't think so, because they've done it so often. I before the game last night, my aunt, huge Alabama fan, crazy Alabama fan, she was like, "I'm just happy we're here," and I was like, "Wow, that's the point at which Alabama, they're in the national championship and they're kind of just happy they're there." And I've had other people say, like, for us to even be there, it's fascinating. So I don't think they're in mourning. They know they have 15 5-stars. But I should say, I'm excited. I haven't talked much about Mizzou present. I'm very excited for Luther Burden. I'm very excited for what Eli Drinkwitz is doing. I think it should be a very fun time, and I think important for the school and university. So I'll shift the Alabama conversation to Mizzou. I think Mizzou is in a really good spot and be fun to write about. I kind of want to pitch a story where I can go spend some time, but we'll see what they say. But I appreciate you guys having me, letting me do this, and asking questions, and hopefully I provided some kind of resource and didn't frustrate too many with the modesty or what have you. But no, it's always fun.
It is what it is. So Nick Saban's not on the hot seat, it's fair to say, after last night's game.
Don't think so. They have Bryce Young and Will Anderson coming back for next year. They should be pretty good.
Okay. Hey, Alec Lewis from The Athletic. Folks, if you are not subscribing to The Athletic, it is the best deal out there. It's very affordable, and the quality of the writing. And now they're going to have the strength of the New York Times behind them. We look forward to great things from you, Alec, and from The Athletic down the road. You can follow him on Twitter at Alec_Lewis. Alec, hope next time we see you in person at the flea market.
No doubt. Hope that is the case, and I hope baseball is ongoing as that happens. Hopefully, we could talk about a season soon enough. But no, seriously, thank you guys. Very cool what you guys do, and I'm glad I'm a part of Mizzou. It's a wild thing, but I'm very appreciative of it.
All right. Next week, Gabe DeArmond from Power Mizzou. In 2 weeks, we'll have a new speaker we haven't had before, Kathy Nelson, who is the president and CEO of the Kansas City Sports Commission. There's a lot going on there. She does a great job, and really look forward to talking to her. Everybody have a great week. We'll see you next week with Gabe DeArmond.